hear what we're presenting. But so I'm pleased to convene Rachel Blau DuPlessis and Robert Fitterman, who I'm not going to sort of do too much of an introduction, but I love all of the books that they have out now. Rachel's is, of course, a lifetime work, drafts in 2 volumes, and you can sort of see some of that. See a display copy out on the book desk, as well as a magisterial book on the long poem, which opens up a lot of the questions that we've been talking about today. And Rob with his book Crevcore, which is a reimagining and remix of William Carlos Williams Patterson. One of the reasons that I brought us together for conversation today is that we are all 3 of us somehow have deep connections to that particular long poem of Patterson. And also we're lovers of Italy, what Rachel might call the big it. I was rereading your drafts, and I was noticing it coming up a lot, and I was like, I wonder how much Italy is in it. But nevertheless, I'll just sort of stop there and leave it to Rob.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Rob. Actually, maybe I could take this off if I know who I am. Thanks again for coming. It's nice to see some familiar faces from last night. And thanks again to all of the organizers. A special thanks to Joe for not only inviting me, but being such a big part of this Crevcore journey, my long poem from the start. Joe has read more revisions of Crevcore than I have. Also, it's great to have Rachel here, a teacher of mine once upon a time, whose support and intelligence was greater than she likely knew. I want to talk for a few minutes about this long poem titled Crevcore, which is the name of my hometown in St. Louis, Missouri, and how this poem came to be. And then I'm going to read an excerpt with very few interruptions, and this will hopefully illustrate some of the things I'm thinking about with the long poem. Nearly all of my books are single book poems. So the idea of a single book in a single poem in a book frame is familiar to me, but the idea of the long poem, this particular project that I'm working on, differs in part because I'm mirroring a modernist long poem, an epic, and also because it involves a lot of research. This form is of my poem is a English to English translation of William Carlos Williams's Patterson. Williams is getting a lot of love today, right? So what I mean by that is that the form is precise in terms of the number of lines per page, the stanza breaks, the indentation, all of that mirrors Patterson. And even the themes are also an echo of Patterson, though in a less explicit way, because they're updated and transported to a different time and place, obviously, and sensibility. Crevcore transposes Williams' post-war hardscrabble New Jersey town, the town of Patterson, which was adjacent to the town where he was living in Rutherford, New Jersey. And he's identifying, describing, enacting a certain way, that post-war moment of a industrial town, and I'm transporting it onto my suburban Midwestern moment that stretches and sort of collapses time between the 1970s and the present. Why the mirroring? Lots of people have asked me that, and I would say that it, for me, is I would say the poetic reasons overlap with personal ones. The genesis for my long poem, Creve Coeur, was inspired by the murder of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, which is not far from where I grew up. And I happened to be in St. Louis that week, visiting my parents in a independent living facility that was also very close to Ferguson. When I got home, I knew I needed to respond to this tragic event, but it was difficult to foresee how to deepen the complexity of that event without cheapening it. Then it hit me one day to model a response after Patterson so that I can include a history that contextualizes the historical backdrop for this terrible event, and at the same time for this infamously segregated St. Louis history. In Patterson, and I'm going to show you in a minute, Patterson is a kind of weave between poetry and prose, so it also echoes the last conversation we were having. It's a kind of patchwork of historical documentation, local news stories, letters, verse, and what I'll call like personal iterations of a character that becomes the city itself, which is a complicated concept that we won't go into here, but is worth thinking about at some other time. That's the part that all of those parts felt right to me, especially this part about using historical documentation and the news stories, local news stories. And I found something very interesting, just as an aside. I think we're a little bit in this kind of post-Warholian, post-Baudrillardian moment. It's very difficult to think of appropriation without it being ironic, without having some quotation around it, even if it's not ill-spirited or malevolent or even insensitive. It still has a certain simulacra around repurposing. Not in the case of Patterson. There's none of that. So it never feels like it has that kind of critical distance. That interests me a lot as well. So when I was thinking about Patterson being a model, I was thinking about those things. And the collage form that he's using is a kind of reconstruction. It allows him to make a reconstruction and to retell the story of a city and the broader implications of that, of course, in the present, and in the case of my book, Creve Coeur, the broader implications of the demise of urban centers throughout the US. Hey. So I think it's the idea of a story being told that distinguishes, for me, the long poem as opposed to a long poem. I would combine with that a story being told, in my case, research as well. Lastly, I'm often asked, why did I bother to mimic Patterson so closely? This is a longer conversation we can have at dinner. But the short version is this. Most of my books rely heavily on found language in an effort to rethink the lyric poem and subjectivity as a kind of chorus of repurposed language. How to articulate a more universal voice or experience for me depends on including a lot of voices, not just my own. Of course, this has to be done with a lot of sensitivity so as to maintain some critical distance, but also to be open to a genuine embrace of material. In the case of Creve Coeur, I'm striving for a variety of found and not found material to construct a city with Williams's Patterson, more than a model, but more like an extension or a continuation of poetry telling the story of an American city life. There are a few things that Creve Coeur shares with Patterson. One is a waterfall. The Passaic Falls, or sometimes called the Patterson Falls, are breathtaking if you haven't seen them. I think underappreciated maybe. I think it's the third largest waterfall in the continental US. You could see why Williams made it the center of his work. In Creve Coeur, we also have a waterfall. Underwhelming. In fact, I know people from Creve Coeur who didn't know we had a waterfall. But of course, this was a good place for me to begin. I'll give you a sense. I don't know how blurry this is. It doesn't really matter though. We're not going to read it. I kind of like blurry images. So a lot of mine will be kind of blurry and pixelated. Just so you don't feel like I'm a professional person working with images. But I just want to be one notch worse than your grandparents. So I have this up because I wanted you to have a look at the this is a typical page of Patterson, and you see a lot of prose, and in Patterson there are smaller font. Can you actually see oh yeah, okay. And then there are these verse forms. Some of them echo or are kind of close to the variable foot that Williams talks about a lot. Nobody really exactly knows what it means, I don't think. But anyway, there it is. Yeah, and the prose sections are usually, again, like local news stories or historical documentation. The numbers are mine on the side. I had to count how many numbers are in each stanza because, as I said, it is a pretty exact mirror in terms of the number of lines per stanza. This is the opening page of Patterson. And as you can see, there's a kind of couplet and then a longer stanza, and then the shorter stanza at the bottom. Mine is the same. It doesn't look exactly the same because of the pagination. Well, I don't have this cool beige colored page. In the Williams preface, and you'll see that both when you get to the, to make a start, I come from a place called Creve Coeur, Missouri. To make a start out of particulars is the very famous opening of Patterson. There's a line in here that I like very much that echoes something that I found myself saying over the last decade or so. So my interpretation, my attention to it and interpretation quickly went to about 5 lines down, sniffing the trees, just another dog among a lot of dogs. That's what I'm getting at when I talk about using found material. I really want to be just another dog among dogs. I don't want it all to be about me talking about my experience going to the park and watching the waterfall. I would rather go online and see if there are other people that have written about this, and probably in the end create some kind of amalgamation. I have heard myself say, I just want to be another passenger on the bus. I don't want to be the bus driver. And so this appeals to me, a dog among dogs. Rigor of beauty is what sort of quest and what for and for whom? Why even speak of I, he dreams, which interests me almost not at all. That's a line from Patterson a little bit later. I'm not going to stop this often because it'll ruin the flow of the thing, but I'm going to stop here. What I like about this line, why even speak of I, he dreams, which interests me almost not at all, is the almost. Mm-hmm. That's my favorite word in that line because he's not absent. He can't be absent. it would be so phony to be absent in Patterson. And yet he wants to not be absent, right? So it interests me almost not at all, is just exactly how I'm feeling. To make a start, I come from a place called Creve Coeur, Missouri. Crève Coeur, loosely translated from the French as broken heart, a sleepy suburb of St. Louis. The name is derived from a dubious myth, a tortured love between an Osage woman and a French fur trapper, presumably ending with the woman's suicide. The same story is retold about a lot of Midwestern lakes, and it lands not too far from Disney's Pocahontas, the seventh member of the Disney princess lineup. Legend has it that when the lovers were torn apart, the woman leapt to her death off the waterfall and into the bottom of Creve Coeur Lake. The body of water then formed the shape of a broken heart. The face of the falls cringes. It's a story I've grown to live with. A thin stream trickles, a thin stream trickles down the face of the falls. But the Creve Coeur Falls has many names: Dripping Springs, the Bluffs, but it's more like a ledge than a waterfall. It never seemed very high nor impressive. It never seemed ideal to me or even possible for a suicide, lovesick, or otherwise. Power walking changes lives. The best way to describe power walking is to think of it as a low impact alternative to jogging. Basically, it takes regular walking and ups the intensity. If you put two walkers next to each other and told one to move at a moderate pace with their arms at their side and told the other to increase their speed while simultaneously pumping their arms, that's the technique. Known in these parts, the Creve Coeur walker powers up the sidewalk at dawn, past the private Monsanto service roads. He looks out over the laboratories. Engineers, lawyers, chemists start to roll into the vast parking lot. Swoosh is the sound of the polywalkers, the walker's poly cotton tracksuit, also called tipped fleece, a deep burgundy, offset nicely by his stark, just out of the box, white New Balance. He picks up his pace, powering onto the sidewalk at Schnucks, onward past McDonald's and into a future Creve Coeur. One, Schnucks, a giant among supermarkets. This is why I don't do self-checkout. I was at Schnucks with my dad and he was overcharged for like 2 out of 10 things. This happens every time we do self-checkout. My dad is somewhat hearing impaired, occasionally stubborn, so I get it when he insists on using self-checkout, but then I'm the one who has to stand in line at customer service and unload everything onto the counter. Ragu pasta sauce was 3 for $5. He got 3, but was charged $8. Chicken sausages were buy one, get one free. He got 4, but was charged 4. It's embarrassing. And to top off everything, he was trying to return a bad batch of flowers. And since it wasn't on his Schnucks rewards card, they made him jump through hoops to exchange it. Dad's a sweetheart, but highly principled, and if crossed, he's known to slam a bouquet of roses on to the service counter, and everyone stands around unaroused like there's been some misunderstanding. Say it, no ideas, but rewards cards. Once upon a time, I worked at this Creve Coeur store, and once when I was out back for a cigarette break, I set free a gold helium balloon trapped behind a dumpster. In bubbly cursive, it read, "Best day ever." From above, higher than the Schnucks rooftop, high enough to make out a crack in the heart-shaped lake, higher than the Schnucks dumpsters and the crumbling asphalt, the shiny gold balloon, long hair flowing, an unrequited love suicide mangled in dead leaves, plastic bags, and dried weeds, a tiny man, ancient, shouting, twisting in the wind. The other side of the balloon reads, grand opening. Every new mall like a fresh start. Back then, there was a manager, Zach, who'd intentionally hide trash in corners to see if I was sweeping properly. I think you missed this area. A man like that, whose hair is very much in place, like a tulip, knows how to bring an MBA degree to grocery store management. But Zach was not a zip code unto himself. Zach used to boast he's worked in nearly every Schnucks location, either helping out or training new hires. Zach claimed he wasn't prejudiced, but that the stores in North County, like in Ferguson or Spanish Lake, just weren't as up to speed as the ones in West County, especially in Kirkwood and O'Fallon. Everything depended, Zach said, on the neighborhood. This part is also from a historical document. But I am going to interrupt so that it kind of move things along a little bit more quickly. This section echoes a lot of the sort of geological and archaeological moments in Paterson, and I'm pointing to the 12th century civilization of the Cahokia tribe, which in around 1200 AD was about 25,000 to 50,000. It was the largest civilization or settlement north of Mexico. It was about the size of London, population-wise at that time. Dotted along southern Illinois and into Ohio, you see a lot of these mounds. There were so many in St. Louis, downtown St. Louis, that the nickname for St. Louis is Mound City. A lot of people wonder where that came from. They look like that. There are some still in the Illinois side that look like this. But on the Missouri side, they were slowly destroyed. In the 19th century, there were about 40 of them in downtown St. Louis. The Cahokia people were vanished around 1400, and it's a mystery exactly what happened, whether that was drought or disease. It's unclear. So they started to tear these down at the end of the 19th century, and by 1904, this was at one point, this particular mound was the size of a football field. By 1904, they had removed all the mounds because there was a very grand and important World's Fair. The Supreme Court continues a few decades. This was that all the mounds were removed, and a few decades later, the city of St. Louis itself nearly vanished. The vision of Harlan Bartholomew, urban planner, was renovation by demolition. For Bartholomew, the bulldozer was the best tool for post-war urban planning. His vision guaranteed no people of color could inhabit this westward movement to the suburbs by unconstitutional segregation practices, which were backed by federal laws. In 1939, St. Louis approved his proposal to demolish over 20 square miles of inner city real estate, over 400 apartment buildings and houses. And with that destruction also came the destruction of a bohemian culture of bookstores, jazz clubs, coffee houses, demolishing what was once termed the Greenwich Village of the West. To this day, massive stretches of downtown St. Louis remain either scorched or poorly developed. Handfuls of low-rise buildings stand alone on empty lots where stretches of highway on-ramps head west to the suburbs. Everybody has roots. Many people would describe Pruitt-Igoe as the greatest disaster in post-war public housing. Pruitt-Igoe was rolled out to be a modernist wonder designed by Minoru Yamasaki, later of World Trade Center fame. 33 units of 11 stories, complete with playgrounds, gardens, and modern amenities. Pruitt-Igoe was in the national spotlight. Architectural Forum praised it as the best high apartment of the year. Utopic. Pruitt-Igoe, however, is not famous for its modernist design or its contribution to urban renewal, but instead it is an icon for a disastrous housing project failure. By the end of the 1960s, Pruitt-Igoe was infamous for its crime, gang violence, drug dealing, and general decay. There are many reasons to point to the failure of this expansive housing project, but nearly all of them include the lack of government funds to maintain the buildings. Dysfunctions in heating, elevators, garbage disposal, rodent control are just a few of the failures that residents had to endure. The plumbing pipes were weather broken or frozen, and often raw sewage was piled in the hallways. Compactors were perpetually broken, so the garbage piled up in the common areas. By the late 1960s, most of the units had missing windows in the dead of winter. As one former resident put it, it's just unbelievable that they would spend the money to build these things, but not the money to maintain them. In addition to the failed infrastructure, Pruitt-Igoe residents had to endure humiliating regulations imposed by the Missouri Welfare Department. Most famously was the man-in-the-house rules. At this time, Missouri Welfare Department barred many fathers not just from living with their families, but from legally living in the state of Missouri. The man-in-the-house rules prohibited women who received aid to dependent children from living with men. Women in Pruitt-Igoe were not allowed to have men in their apartments and receive aid due to their perceived reproductive irresponsibility. So by 1959, women headed the majority of households in Pruitt-Igoe. And then it all came crashing down, literally. In 1972, less than 20 years after it was erected, Pruitt-Igoe began to be demolished. That April, the demolition of 2 towers was aired live on TV news and attracted great public interest around the world as a symbol of urban renewal gone wrong. As an aside, it's a strange coincidence that these 2 Yamasaki designs, Pruitt-Igoe and the World Trade Center, were both exploded, toppled, and viewed around the world on TV. I'm going to speed up a little bit to the end. Who doesn't have something to say about repetition? The power walker walks past a cluster of teenagers. Frampton's Show Me the Way lilts from a car radio, some crumbled Lion's Choice sandwich wrappers, 2 Emos, pizza boxes, Marlboros, Bush beer. It could almost be a picnic, except for that one dude. His name escapes me, wasted on Quaaludes, flicking his cigarette into the void. Balthazar. That kid's name was Balthazar. But everyone called him Ballsy, which of course he didn't like. I also heard him called Belief because his father was a pastor. Anyway, he now runs a gun shop out of Sunoco in Crestwood. In winter, the Creve Coeur Falls freezes over with its thick slabs of white ice like stalactites. The whole scene is expectedly gray, nothing like the marvelous blue and pink stage lighting projected onto the stalactites and stalagmites of Merrimack Caverns, where an Ethel Merman recording of God Bless America blares out of a loudspeaker on a continuous loop at the conclusion of the cavern tour. Thanks.
Rachel, are you ready to go up next?
Sure. Yep, as long as you're hearing me.
Are we good in the audience? We can hear? Okay, yeah, it seems like
Great.
we,
Should I begin or is there anything more? I'll
yeah,
just start.
go for it, go for it.
Okay, I'll just start by saying the phrase
Oh, wait,
poetic research. Do you want to do anything first? Or am I fine? Okay,
yeah, I'm not quite sure how to, actually, it's on your computer that you would need to do it. to
What do I
spot-
have
the
to do?
Spotlight, I don't know. I think it's fine if we can, that. Right. I think you should just go, Rachel. We don't want to get caught up in
Okay,
another technical
here-
issue. Yeah, thanks.
I guess the first thing to do after all this particular fussing is to say thank you to the organizers for letting me, because of my, what I would call, with a friend's help, oncology ontology, go from Philadelphia on Zoom, not attending the conference like you're all doing. The phrase poetic research is an enticing one and rather different from poetics research. I'm going to comment briefly on both of them. By poetic, there are two possibilities here. One is a problematic use of the adjective as if this were research into being really poetic. It might mean studying period style or how people show they're very poetic, but characterized in a familiar way by romantic imagery or lots of euphemism, fancy, and high-minded diction. This is not what I mean. So here, the term poetic encompasses what a poet does when she takes on a suitable topic for poetry or a mode for poetry. I do not mean poetic as an honorific for everything from an air-filled atmospheric painting, which I've seen used in a museum, to an ad for a gauzy dress. Poetic research for this panel involves interpretive activity in poetry, and that might be any kind of research into books, documents, newspapers, testimonials, and also other poets, as we've just seen. It might be contributions to your source material, which you may use directly, indirectly, interpretively, in various ways. And the poet is inspired by this, and the attitudes toward the power that the documents show, or implacable events, as Rob alluded to with Michael Brown's murder, become pertinent to the poet and into the poem's power or charisma because of some conviction in the poet. And it's for that reason, but not the only reason, that long poems seem to be a wide terrain for poets taking on tasks of poetic research by finding documents, by analyzing documents, by entering the document in some way. Think of Olson or Pound, Norbies, Philip, Rukeyser, or Williams. And scholarly research per se has some of the standards of accuracy and completeness, devotion to findings, unwillingness to accept half measures. It's not at all clear whether poetic research, as opposed to scholarly research, plays exactly by these rules. It might claim to, but it never is quite on the same page. It has a different purpose. The poetic research might be tendentious, selective, unbalanced, or seriously assuming the absolute correctness of a particular position, as Pound did in his fascist period. So scholarship written to present or analyze research is different because a poem is not written to prove the research, but to play with it in some way, to engage it, or to inspire very large themes of a writer's poetry. You might find in poetic research tendentious tendencies, and because a poet is filled with assumptions, trying out experimental findings, and making feelings convincing or exciting by poetic tensions in language and structure. Dante would be probably my example of findings that readers might not agree with and might find tendentious or worthy of skepticism, with its support of a vision of heaven, purgatory, and hell, and adherence to a contemporaneous, at that time, Catholic line. But it's very compelling as a poem, right? To say the obvious. Poetics research, okay, the S on poetics makes a gigantic difference. And I would just briefly say it's a certain kind of analysis of your stance towards the language, and you can do it with any number of people, with any number of documents, asking what are the key tenets of a writer's terms in an essay or a letter. How would you place them in traditions of poetics, philosophy, theory, whatever? What are the aims for poetry? And people don't necessarily like to think that they're generalizing, but a skilled worker in poetics, analyzing the poetics, can often tease out from the most, from the strangest documents, including the poetics of a poem inside the poem, often concealed or unconcealed. A person can tease out these materials, but that's not poetic in the singular research. I have a couple of observations about Joe, who is being a little upstage here, for which I apologize. Joe's chapter for this panel, which he will talk about, and is like Rob's in being narrative, leading to a discovery. And in Rob, it seems to me that in Krevker, which I pronounce that way, I'm sorry, the discovery is of the banality and the sadness and the mediocrity of the place, while nonetheless somehow it has its perky moments, like the Baby Tooth Project that he writes about, a very interesting work by a woman scientist, but also its damaging and destructive moments, one being the incredible massacre of Black people during World War I, or before we entered, and the other being Monsanto and Roundup, which is probably an already testified to incredibly damaging thing. With Joe, his topic is a concealment of something that he thinks should be found, and it's a painting in a museum. So the interest in narrative in both of them is quite is marked for me, especially because the poetic in both of these people, both Joe and Rob, their topic, their essential topic is decoding and examining a poetic analysis in both cases where the poet becomes a kind of researcher. If you think about prior poems like the Odyssey, there's a division between the hero and the griot, the one who's speaking. The more you get towards the modern, and Dante may be an example of this actually, the researcher is the poet. And you see this very much in Pound, in Norbice Philip, in Williams, in Rookheiser. They make a point of discovery of documents, and doing the research is a central part of the poem, unconcealing a hidden or important history, along with interpreting that particular past in part via language and structure, not just by sending a message to the assembled multitudes. So the desire of researcher poets to treat library work as an unconcealing of long concealed facts and ideas by means of the poem gives the poet a desire to unveil in various ways and to maybe even scold or excoriate or genially critique the thought that the world has concealed this material, but the poet will unconceal it. Strange, and that's true in part of Liz Willis's book, which I know is on the agenda here, although Liz is not on this panel. The strange thing about drafts, I guess I should speak about my own work somewhat. All right, it's dated 1986 to 2012, and it's a very long and varied work, in part of poetic research. It's on the far end of a chart of length of long poems, and it has 114 or 115 cantos, depending on what you count. And that's part of the structure of the poem, because it has an unnumbered work, but you could count it if you want to. The research occurs variously. There's a lot of citation. There's some self-citation, so the poem recirculates. There's a good deal of gleaning from news reports, some of which are remarkably damaging to various things, such as American pretension, wars that we have fought in the world, and so on. But there is one aspect to research which is somewhat parallel to what Rob spoke about, but it's not quite the same. And that is involves torquing. I torque prior poems significant to me, putting pressure on them, and I sometimes rewrite them, or I give a version of my findings in various ways. And this is charged up because some of the torqued poems are very famous, and I'm just a dog among dogs, as Rob said. They're by Dante, Ingeborg Bachmann, Oppen, Pound, Eliot, Yeats, and some findings are critical and some extend the original works variously, both critical and in homage to. Some of them get reaffirmed, some are reinterpreted for our century, and some play with shifts of gender materials, although that is not my only aim. For example, a canzone by Dante basically is about heterosexual yearning, male to female, and my canzone is on mother-daughter love and an adolescent child. Other torque poems involve critical theory that has been very important to the 20th century, such as Adorno's pain-ridden pronouncement that you should not write poetry after Auschwitz, which is of course incorrect, and he later corrects it. There are a number of such texts. The Benjamin, which is actually in late work, if I'm not mistaken, a Benjamin poem does similar things, but there, in general, in drafts, there are about 20 of 115 poems that torque texts, and it results in a series of textures of critical consideration of modernism and modernity. So I would say that I'm extremely interested in meaning, even though drafts is an abounding work of plethora, and it achieves a sense of assemblage of a vast territory of stylistic ranges, which the vastness of it is uncharacteristic of most poems, even long ones, meaning that it's so varied that I've actually been asked the question, why is it so self-different? And I might have some answers eventually. So somehow the poetic research makes a poem adjacent to the poetic, to the essay. So the long poem as poetic research seems to be streaming it from poetry into the essay, yet back to poetry. Because as I keep on saying in various ways, a poem is not just a message you send in a telegram, it's entirely dependent on language and structure and its own playfulness. Okay, as that's about what I think would be fair in terms of time, but I would like to read a little teeny bit of a poem that illustrates a kind of torquing of, and it also has a biblical story within it. So this is from this section, which is number 20, section 29, is from my 40 section poem of which is based on Oppin's of Being Numerous. My poem is called Hard Copy, which says all this stuff in a pun. It's both a hard copy, obviously. If I had my printer here, right, I don't, I would show you, but it's also hard copy. What a thing to do. This is a story. This part of it is more critical of Oppin than most of the parts are, mainly because it's his poem is a very smart poem about war, American complicity, and a whole bunch of stuff, which you can read. My part of this, my little part here, takes the story of Rachel in Hebrew scriptures. And if you remember, she stole something. Right? So she stole her father's teraphim. What in the name of monotheism was that about? Those rare black stones, sacred knickknacks, idols, symbolic lion grabbed at that got chipped. Cover them with the ass of female claim. Settle in for the duration and refuse being in the way of women to rise. Say you are neither disloyal nor pilferer, and sit tight on the icons and rocks of meaning gathered from the paternal household. The talismanic counterfoils, even the fewest and smallest, from the fierce storehouses of articulation and defensiveness. You will remake these goods in your own blood. I didn't take enough, so go get more. Tokens from the broken labyrinth. Thank you.
We're gonna switch places so that I can be in front of the microphone. Can you grab that stuff so I can get a little, oh, did we this actually?
Nope.
Okay, so, I have to get one thing set up here and then, okay.
Can you hear us, Rachel?
From there, probably she can't hear as well because the microphone is
So
on.
we would share this one?
Yeah, I think if you want to talk to Rachel, it's actually your laptop. That's the main conduit. It has not, that has
Nothing to do with the
nothing to
microphone.
do with that.
I
So
see.
we're gonna open up the desktop version of this and actually make sure we share that. Okay. Rachel, give us a thumbs up if you can see everything and hear everything. Good. Okay, great.
So
Okay, so we're gonna do slideshow, play from start. And then what does it look like? Okay, great. All right, well, thank you very much. This presentation I'm calling it the Four-Handed Poem and Poetic Research. Let me start the timer. So if you go to Orvieto, the cathedral there's a famous fresco by Signorelli, which is a fresco of the Apocalypse. And on the across the basement frieze are where's the mic even? How is the mic all the way over? Oh, that's me. Okay, and I'm Rob, and okay, that was confusing a little bit. All right, so this Signorelli fresco of the Apocalypse, on the basement frieze are these images of famous authors. On the left, of course, it's hard to miss that is Dante. On the right, there's a lot of debate about who this might be, but this is the poet Statius. And I think it's really interesting the different attitudes that they have towards the apocalypse that is taking place above them, right? So Statius is actually looking outside of the lunette towards directly at the apocalypse to be able to write about it. But Dante is buried in the books, right? Not even paying attention at all. And I think what Dante is doing here is what I am calling four-handed poetry, a kind of research-based long poem that requires the interposition of other writers. And, you know, for this, between the author and the paper, one interposes a sometimes awkward architecture of books, notebooks, screens propped and held open, posing challenges that are both poetic and ergonomic. My four-handed piece, The Veridencies, is an art history essay in rhymed verse on the green bodies in the history of art. It's a poetic query into what's called the verdaccio. Literally in Italian, this means ugly green. But it's used in Western religious art not as a kind of ugly thing, actually. It's a strange mix of both asceticism and eroticism when we see this green on the flesh in paintings across time. And it's a project that unites many modalities, as you can see here: an essay, a poem, a tour, a song, a history, a heresy. I also think that with it working in this, there's four distinct types of research that I am engaging in. One is the research into form. So because the Veridencies is done in rhyme, which is a neglected and often disparaged art form, this poem could only be possible through a long consideration of what would make rhyming work possible and compelling today. Part of my artistic background is I used to teach sound art at one point, so sound experimentation on one hand, and on the other hand, an intimate knowledge of the American songbook. And I think these are like two poles in the spectrum of relationships that you could have to sound patterning. On the one, you're equipped with a way to sense resonances beyond typical harmonic progressions in instrumental frequencies. And on the other, the tradition of Tin Pan Alley song provides texts for the exploration of American rhyme in ways that American poetry mostly discounted in the free verse 20th century. Some of my first projects that did explore rhyme, at least in the last 20 years, were in translating 19th century French poetry. And I think that's a really good place for any American poet to really start, again, since there's not a lot of examples in American 20th century poetry and you know, even 19th. But the fact is that 19th century French poetry is redolent with so many playful and profound rhymes that are really left out of most translations. You know, the French poetry that we get from the French is desiccated and perfunctory sometimes, and it's sad to see. So that was a really great workshop for me. One part of that project was doing these Rambo mashups, literalizing the illumination for the modern age by mashing it up with movie trailers, right? So I think the movie trailer is a kind of modern illumination. And so that's one of those projects. My Michael Meyer project, which I'm now selling in limited edition tarot deck form in the back, was a translation of the 17th century alchemical poet, Michael Meyer. And I think one of the things about doing this sound experimentation and sound research with translation is that one of the many reasons is that with translation, you're not dealing with a moving target, right? You have a source text that you are encrusting with these sound patterns, let's just say, without having to generate your own content. Although for projects like this, a lot of the lines are just fully generated by me. It's a total invention. It's more of an interpretation as a translation. In this case, I introduce into Meyer a tercet form, which is not in the original, but I think is appropriate to the original because it's all about this play of threes throughout and the ways in which binaries are disrupted by this third thing. And so that forced me to constantly, even if I didn't want to, I would have to add lines and add content and add sound patterning to make that work. The other thing that I had pulled up here, let's see if I can get it on the internet. I can't really, let's see if I can open this. It's a little bit hard, but this is a GIF project that combined the same rhyming form that I developed in the Meyer project to do a poem that united this rhyming tercet form with gifs of Jello sculptures that I made. So basically these are, you know, you can find this online. It's hard to read in this context, but it's a, you know, a mini long poem, let's just say, in gifs, in tercets. That was part of this continuing research. In the end, one of the things that I like about rhyme is I'm a big fan of Jean-Jacques Le Cirque, who talks about the ways in which certain poetic constraints allow language to speak itself. And I think that's one of the things that rhyme does for me. It allows for some spooky discoveries when you're sort of forced to work within this type of constraint. The second type of research is, this is got a lot of things going on here. Let me go back to the play from current slide. There we go. Research into objects. So the Veridency stages an encounter with art driven by both intellectual and urban wandering and supported by growing archive of my own museum photos. So before we get into any book research, this research into the primary image driven by desire, by chance, and by the rhyme that happens within the image as well as within the word. And across these rhymes, I follow a trail of images that echo each other, setting me on a voyage of abandoned analogies and allowing me to discover things neglected by both poetry and art history. So last night I read part of the Jericho section, and one of the things that became interesting to me is that starting with this painting in 1819, this form of pyramidal atrocity became almost like a cliche, right? And you see these sort of pyramids of body appearing, across 100 years of art history. And so, one of the things that I did was I created an arc across, from Jericho to Delacroix, which is pretty typical in art history. One of the things that we forget about this famous image of liberty are the bodies, and again, the green flesh and the eroticism is evident in this particular image. To Moreau, who I'll read an excerpt from the Moreau section today, who gets more into the symbolist decadent version of that. To Delville, and I have a very interesting story about this particular painting that I won't get into today, but it's actually something that is hidden from the public for various historical reasons. And that sequence, or that arc that's created just between those four figures, took about from the winter of 2023 to the spring of 2025. So it's a 2-year crawl across history, making these sort of tight rhyming linkages, again, both through the image and the word. There is typical book research, which I think is crucial, but perhaps the least interesting, and I won't really get into it in detail, but I'll make the bold claim that the technical information that exists on the Verdaccio and underpainting techniques, there's no scholarship that really considers this trope fully, at least none that I've found. The color itself is a conversation across paintings between painters, with the writers seemingly left out, and across eras. In many ways, then, this project is a practical application of Julia Kristeva's assertion of the semiotic aspect of pure color in paintings. Her definition of poetics itself is precisely how we trace these non-symbolizable realities, these semiotic gestures that act as implicit challenges to language and discourse. And I think that art history research is simply unequipped to make this dense net of connections across analogies of image and language. The last thing, and I won't get into this too much either for time's sake, is one's relationship, the research into one's relationship to time. How do you find your proper form of accretion? The structure of the poem being a kind of structure of time. This is the more mystical element of research. This is, how the poem connects to one's life and one's life work. Rachel has done an amazing job in her book, Long Essay on the Poem, talking about the longing for the long poem and the existential aspects of this type of, we could even call it life extension through poem, and the research of the poem and the search for the poem, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where I'm going to end with the discursive portion. And now I'm going to just jump into the section of Moreau. Last night, we heard the Jericho section, and there's a longest section on Delacroix between that before we get to Jericho, Moreau at the end. With the transition to symbolism, this tendency to pile greening people pyramidally becomes more purplely pronounced. Amid the orgiastic end of representational art, where the world itself will be denounced. Consider Gustave Moreau's mystic flower stave, sprouting from a hummus of human gore instead of the al-dilah of priestly power, its irreal carnation the blossom of the realism of Jericho and Delacroix. What started with Jericho's virtuous ostentation, in other hands, can become a kind of misanthropic ornamentation. Although I feel this is a kind of weak criticism for these later masters of old mystery, Eros and Noumenon. So we'll just have to ask ourselves, what in art's sake is going on? When Moreau, who we will admire more anon, in 1880, paints his Helen at the Scaean Gate, a Trojan place name recalling the Chian's fate, we have not only turned Turks back into Trojans, but armies to color spatulate. The fog of war forming the smudge of palette knife, bodies bloody and bilious, victims of the cult of beauty victorious. Fiat ars et pereat mundus. As Helen of Troy becomes the new ideal, we realize that beauty is not altogether beautiful, but rather the engine of war, its arabesque of lance, altogether inseparable from goddess elegance. Though through the influence of Chasserio, caught twixt Ong and Delacroix, an unsung and chaotic Latino, and the later Hierophants and androgyne appreciators of the symbolists with their melange of angel and gel of Magdalene, on the horizon of irony and mythology, Moreau marks the horror zen of decadence, the fin de siècle's rebellion against history's forward cadence, against nature itself, against Victorian morals and the cult of progress, positively silly, against Impressionism's monetizing of a water lily. So what seems to us a violence is a violet of the mind inviolate. As the dandy scholar Philippe Julien noted of this late and mystic fleur seated in the corpses of Jericho's atelier abattoir, the decadents were fond of dwelling on such horror, partly out of the desire to shock, but largely out of a fury at being unable to find a faith or love to match their illusions. Moreau was more moral than most of his peers, and yet obsessed over a bloody rampage during the course of 30 years. A gore-encrusted page taken from the classics, but convulsive in style. A seraglio of murder in a kingly domicile. Into his great and gruesome work, The Prétendants, drawn out from 1852 to 1882, he withdrew, detailing the cruel virtue of Odysseus slaying the suitors of Book 22, in which the luxurious home that suited the Proci well enough to take as their own suddenly became their death chamber. Now immortalized in amber attitudes around the throne, these ambitious princes and lusty dukes are reduced to what the French call the painting's peripeties, perpetually trapped in weird positions of panic, of death arrayed, and oddity of oddities, of poetic insolence that ignores the fray. Odysseus is as if absent, while wisdom herself, enserpented and ray radiating, dominates the scene. In the darkened corners of the palace, not graced by the light of Pallas Athena, are bodies pell-mell, half done here, half undone there, as if to memorialize the patience, very Penelopean, to which Moreau was heir, preferring the blue columns of contemplative immobility to a warrior's ire. A manly man, stage right, attempts to break down the door with a poet's lyre, in vain, while vain ephebic wonders preen and lounge like living fleur-de-lis athwart the great hell that wily Ulysses in his great hall has wrought. What are they doing? Asks the spectator. In truth, they are not doing anything. They are in thought. Sagesse, the essence of beauty is inert and involute. Dull action is the insolence, and a musicked lute the savior of the useless, the very core of green reverie, absolute plasticity of core, figurated in hieroglyphs of thinking that momentarily elude the king. Out of manic stratagem is mined the gem of stillness. So that we may perceive a more hidden God among us, Moreau has placed a blue figure, stage left of canvas, emplumed like a showgirl and as a Delsartean actress posed, immured in the art of his non-escape from life and death itself, this human in the shape of a butterfly in the stanza, bluely defined by his own tights, his stance a defiance of the lewd blood of anger, death-faced in good form. I only know this room contains me. It is enough for me. It is Attis, the living Mithraic god of vegetation, from whose blood violets spring, who himself was sprung from a pomegranate, ere which was the genitals of the monster Agdestis castrati, which when placed between the breasts of Cybele godmother, gave birth to a black meteor, a star child who then descended into matter. His starry hat or tiara is all that's left of this sunder of terra from the divine. Attis, not self, but Endendros, or tree elf of pine. From Phrygia to Rome, his cult would travel, a continuance of an already weird itinerary, after priests and sibyls consoled that the sacred meteorite containing the fairy be brought to the shores of Italy to end the Punic War. Its celebrants in yellow robes, black bracelets, and beehive bouffants, by cutting themselves with pottery shards, may have by this magic defeated Hannibal, but scandalized the SPQRs. Cavorting wildly to the hard poetry of their Sylvan Newman, on the day of blood they would themselves unman, to pine in an excess of orgiastic limitation. And I'll skip ahead the last minute or so to as a quote by the Emperor Julian, the famous apostate, on this kind of sexual panic that happened in Rome during the Punic Wars. Even when he's writing about this, it's history. Attis stops his infinity through the castration, and the gods by this means exhort us also to cut off the infinity of our nature and hasten back again to that which is bounded and uniform, and if possible, to the one itself. After which, when perfectly accomplished, it is proper that the hilaria should succeed. For what can be more joyful? What can be the occasion of greater hilarity than the soul flying from infinity and generation and the storms in which it is perpetually involved, and by this means returning to the gods themselves? But Attis, being among the number of these, the mother of the gods by no means neglected him in his progressions beyond what is proper, but commanding him to restrain his infinity, converted him to herself. Thank you. Okay, Rachel, we're going to try to do this. I'm not sure if I can turn on my mic without excessive feedback. You won't be. I won't be able to. Okay, so both Rob and myself will talk to this one laptop, and then I think Rachel, you are unmuted, so
Hello, laptop.
we should be good for conversation.
Okay.
Go ahead. Oh, yeah. So stop share. There we go. Wait, no. Why is that still? What?
See what's underneath here.
Here, just oh yeah, turn off the PowerPoint. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Pat's this to that.
Yeah. Get out of that.
Okay. So then just go to the, yeah, you got it. Great. Turn what? I don't know. I mean, that will take 10 minutes for us to find it, I think, unless you know how to find it quickly. Yeah. Okay.
I think I know how to do
Yeah.
that. I think so. And more
Yeah, exactly.
and caption.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, okay.
Yep,
Okay, that's it.
Okay.
Okay, good. Well, there you go.
that's it.
Yeah, good.
2 seconds, like you said.
So. Who would like to start?
That is a almost cartoon worthy laugh.
Oh.
I didn't want to say evil, but
Okay.
wow, look how good the caption is too.
Oh, we should have used that the whole time. Oh, well, next time.
Do you want to start?
I don't know. I mean, because I just presented, so I'm a little bit more, I'm kind of chilling out. So maybe I'll jump in a second, or maybe
Wait,
questions.
Are we using this mic?
I don't think that has anything to do with anything at this point. I think I mean, yeah, we could. I've actually for the audience, yeah, but it has nothing to do with Rachel. So
Oh,
you
okay.
can have that, and
I don't care.
we can have that.
Can you hear us, Rachel, and everything?
Absolutely. And
Oh,
what-
wonderful. I loved everything you said.
Mm.
And
Well, that-
especially and I don't know, I don't know if it was just the economy with which you said it, or like something, sometimes things they click 40 years later than they should, but the idea of like when you were like poet researcher, poet equal researcher,
Mhm.
research equal, it's like it suddenly struck me that like historians don't have a monopoly on retelling history. What?
Mm.
It's like I never thought about that, but I mean, it's really true,
Mhm.
but
right?
they may have a monopoly on not being tendentious historians, although that could be debated also, as in many book reviews you see the question come up of
Mhm.
that. Well,
Mhm.
I'm glad. I mean, eh, that seems to be what we're talking about. People doing research in real things, real objects, as Joe has said, which are paintings, which are already transposed objects in interesting ways, and no ideas, but in things, which has to be a phrase that most of us have puzzled over enormously, while finally probably deciding he means no ideas, but in things. So there it is. I think that we all tell histories, including folk tales, religious stories. They're just not necessarily accurate in the way that history is deemed to be accurate, and really makes an effort to be accurate. That is, it counts things, it tells you the right chronology as far as they can discover it. It tells you who the actors are, including actors that you don't really think about, and that's history from the bottom up.
Mhm.
So yeah, poetry is part of the world in which history is also written, I guess. I
Mhm.
mean,
Yeah.
and
I
it's
mean, one thing that Marlene mentioned during lunch, which I thought was interesting, was that, in some fields, research is something that you just don't do unless you have an IRB, right? Like there's like specific like bureaucratic, hoops that you have to go through to be able to justify what are doing as research, right? And I think that that's like almost the most extreme example, but I think there's a lot of other less harsh requirements that the disciplines self-impose for various reasons, whether they're sort of like economic gatekeeping or just, a sense of
yeah. But
control.
An IRB is not just about gatekeeping; it's about mistreating the people.
Well, yes, exactly.
Just to
Yeah,
make
those
make
are
that clear.
two different things.
Right. There are more boring IRBs, but I mean, you have to sometimes have those because of disasters and sadnesses that have happened in the past with
Mm.
research on human beings.
Hmm. But that would be an interesting kind of question. Are we doing research on human beings as we do poetry?
We're certainly doing research on ourselves, as you said before that.
Okay, so then it's okay then.
Well, it would be fun to actually do a parody where we would, have an IRB on what we're doing. I think it would be kind of lovely for poetry that is only about subjectivity and how one feels all the time, 100%, which obviously Rob has critiqued. And clearly you are, you know, in the process of critiquing by using paintings in the intense way that you do. And by the
Mhm.
way, I'd like to say a word for your rhyming, which I totally, in the one section that I had, was absolutely brilliant. Longer lines, lines that had no meter, but had exacting, yes, Tin Pan Alley type, but a high-minded Tin Pan Alley rhyming, sometimes in French, in the
Mm.
poem, in the chapter that you gave me or that
Right.
we had. So I agree about rhyme is an underused resource and often uh, trashed without thought.
Hmm. Right, right. I mean, I love the canto doggerel that
Oh
in
yes,
dress because it kind of, unpacks why, why not doggerel, right?
right, right. For those, I mean, this is a couplet rhyme about Bush and the pushback against feminism, which began under one of those bushes. That you could look under the bush and find out, and is also a defense of dogs, how much better they are at doggerel is best poetry, etc., etc. It's very ironic, and therefore women who are dogs and some, canards, um, are the best poets. And it's a hysterical comic poem in drafts, which I
Mhm.
recommend to all. It also is really like a patter song. To read it
Mm,
is takes a lot of mouthing.
mm,
Um,
mm. Yeah,
so that's, yeah, I'm glad you like that. I
yeah.
actually love having written it, but that's what I mean by things are self-different in drafts.
Mm,
No other poem is like doggerel, although there are one or two rhymed works, one of which
mm,
ballad and gloss,
mhm,
um,
mm, mm,
and a lot of rhyming hither and yon in drafts, but no
mhm,
intense all poems, all
mhm.
lines all the time.
Hmm. Hmm. I mean, there's another thing going on then in drafts that I think is interesting that you do that I don't see. I mean, maybe I see this in some language poets, is not all, is that you deal with, I mean, I think you call it like maybe the word is cryptogram, but I can't think of the exact word, but it's like secret writing. It's sort of like what are the sort of sounds within words and word fragments that are sort of forgotten. And I think that the one that's interesting, just rereading the beginning again recently, you know, you kind of like in a really subtle way reference Virgil because you're using the word cano, which is I sing, right? Sort of,
Right. It's
arma virum que cano trorai
right.
prima saboris, etc. Right?
And
And so, but you're
the
dealing with
fun,
the cannot. What is the cannot in cano, right? Like, what is the insufficiency in the song, which is very
right,
interesting.
right. Well, thank you. And I just I'm amazed that you've read all of it. I never think anybody reads it but me and then Rod. I mean, it has been published in full by Coffee House Press in a beautiful edition, actually.
Well,
Which
where I access this, and everybody should know this, I think, is Pen Sound.
right,
That's
right.
been my go-to. I think once, like, when maybe my third or fourth iPod back, one time I just downloaded them all, and so got a nice embodied sense of them.
Could I change the subject and ask
Yes.
about imagery? I mean, for example, I really was struck in your work. Of course, you need images, and you actually talk to me in an email about you can't get publishers to do images. And it seems to me that poetry is tending towards, is moving in one direction, in one unit of it, towards the artist's book. And
Mm,
I know that I've done collage poems, and Liz Willis has illustrations. Gene Huving has a book with illustrations. Rob, it's almost as if you wanted illustrations, but you know, the book so far doesn't have them or something. But
Right.
I'm fascinated by the fact that publishers find illustrating poetry absolutely impossible, and it may very well be from the point of view of finances. But
Right.
there, I would love to open a discussion about that because Joe, you seem so frustrated by not having being able to actually produce a book with
Right.
images, but only you know online, which is perfectly okay, but it it doesn't have that permanence. And
Right.
I
Right.
know that in drafts there are one section with color images, which is a collage poem called Primer, but the other section, which originally had to be pruned for my own reasons, called mail art, MAIL art, mail art, is only in black and white. And that can be powerful, but it's limiting if your imagination runs to color. And
Yeah. I mean, maybe we just have to put a call out there for people like, you know, who are interested in publishing and have a, you know, want to invest in this type of work. But it's just, I think it's one of those things where, yeah, the desire is there, but it's a real economic limitation to do that. I even to send things out, I've started to do things sending out things on print with print on demand books simply because of the fact that they're cheaper than color Xeroxing. So it's a whole weird economics. We're about out of time, but I wanted to see if there was anybody in the audience that that had a question for any of us. Yeah, Jean. I don't think she can. Maybe you either come up here or I can translate. I could take the question. Oh,
just
wait,
for me,
there's a
translate.
microphone. Okay.
Hi, Rachel. It's Jean.
I think she's not here. I think you need to get up really close there.
You know, is that Jean?
This laptop on the mic.
Okay. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Jean. How are you doing?
I was interested what your poetic research, poetics research, etc. Earlier today, we had some disparity going around about disciplines. And I wanted to ask you, Rachel has a husband who's a historian, to make things out here. I wanted to ask you the document that I think also informs Liz Willis's lion taming, which is Susan's House, the restoration and captivity of Mrs. Mary Rowlandson. Some of my students read this. The question is, isn't that more accurate history than any history of that particular encounter that a historian could possibly create? An argument.
That's a tendentious question because, you know, basically, this is a memoir by the person. Is that correct? I haven't studied it the way your students have. Um, I I think that they come at a memoir of their own issues or a narrated by somebody else told to. I think that that's different from a historian's from a historian's account because they may take in different kinds of material, and that's the only thing I can say. I mean, it's one thing to claim that poetry is more accurate than history. Um, you know, that is a position that you can take that's up poetry, you know, but I would not necessarily take that position about any document because documents also have sources and reasons for being, and you can ask of documents what's missing, who told it, why they told it, who were they influenced by, what was the pressures on them, and so on. So you can analyze anything that comes your way, including literally the garbage in the street, if you want to really analyze something. And I think every single thing in reality that you want to write about has to be put through some process of analysis, and empathetic analysis, certainly, but not necessarily um, uh, falling on your knees in front of it, which I'm not accusing you of doing, Jean. I'm thinking of Poundians in the old era of Pound, who just anything went, anything goes. I mean, guy was, you know, had his real issues. Or T.S. Eliot's claim in After Strange Gods that I won't, you know, free thinking Jews are the problem in America, really, and so on and so forth. Those things are poetry and they're documents of poetics, let's say, but they're not going to be accurate. They're just a position that people take. I don't. I like to try to deal with truth, but I would never claim it was ultimate.
Okay, well, thank you. And that leaves a lot for discussion. And as a young poet scholar, I did make the argument that Susan Howe's Mary Rowlandson was a more accurate history.
Well,
Thanks
I
for
think
the question.
I think we'll have to I'm seeing like my two-headed nature sort of here. It's sort of very disconcerting. We'll just have to leave it at that. Just another dog amongst another dogs. We need to sort of like move around to the next fire hydrant. And so we will thank you for making the time to come and participate with us.
Thank you very much.
And we'll
And
talk soon.
If people want to ask me a question, please email me. And
Okay.
anyone, Jean, for example, and any of the Joe can give you my email. Just
Yes.
no weird things. Okay, just regular questions.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Rob.